The night unfolded inside a sprawling mansion glowing with golden light where a high-profile gathering pulsed with quiet opulence. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead, scattering reflections across polished marble floors, while a live orchestra filled the air with smooth, enchanting melodies. Guests draped in designer gowns and tailored suits moved effortlessly through the rooms, their laughter low and controlled, carrying the weight of influence and privilege. Among them stood a young woman poised and graceful, yet quietly withdrawn. Her elegance was undeniable, but there was a softness in her gaze that set her apart from the others. She watched more than she spoke, absorbing every detail, as if she were still learning the rules of this glittering world. Married into immense wealth, she carried herself with care, yet not complete belonging. Her presence drew subtle attention. Whispers passed between guests. Curious glances lingered a moment too long. Beneath the beauty and glamour, an unspoken tension drifted through the air like something waiting to be revealed. Soon it clung to her thoughts, making her chest tighten as she wondered why tonight felt different, heavier somehow, as though the evening held a secret meant only for her to discover before it ended. She had not always belonged to places like this, where every detail whispered luxury and every smile seemed carefully measured. Not long ago, her world had been simple, shaped by modest routines and quiet dreams that did not stretch far beyond comfort and stability. She remembered small spaces filled with warmth, not grandeur, and conversations that felt real rather than rehearsed. Everything had changed the moment she married him, a billionaire whose life existed on an entirely different scale. The transition had been swift, almost unreal, as if she had stepped into someone else's story overnight. She told herself she was fortunate, and in many ways she was. He had been kind, attentive, and deeply charming in the beginning, making her believe that love could bridge any gap between their worlds. Even now, she held on to that belief, convincing herself that what they shared was genuine and strong. Yet beneath her gratitude lingered a quiet discomfort she could never fully silence. Among elite circles, she often felt like an outsider pretending to belong, carefully mimicking gestures and conversations she had never grown up with. Lately, something had shifted. His late nights had become more frequent, his explanations shorter, his presence more distant even when he stood beside her. Questions formed in her mind, but rarely found their way to her lips. She feared the answers might unravel everything she trusted. Tonight, that unease pressed heavier against her chest, as if the air itself carried a warning. Something was different, and deep down, she felt that before the night ended, everything she believed about her life might change forever. The atmosphere subtly shifted the moment the host made his presence known, as though the entire room adjusted itself around him without a single word being spoken. He moved with effortless authority, his confidence sharp and unshakable, drawing attention from every corner of the mansion. Conversations softened as eyes followed him, admiration mixed with a quiet sense of unease. He was a man people respected, but never entirely relaxed around, his influence stretching far beyond the walls of the party. His gaze swept across the crowd with careful precision until it landed on her, and for a brief moment, it lingered. There was something deliberate in the way he studied her, as if he had been expecting her presence all along. Without hesitation, he began walking in her direction, his approach calm yet purposeful. She straightened slightly, caught off guard by the sudden focus, unsure of what to expect. When he finally stood before her, his presence felt overwhelming, his expression unreadable but intent. He spoke with a smooth, controlled tone, yet there was an edge beneath it that made her uneasy. His words were polite, but his eyes told a different story, one that hinted at knowledge she did not possess. The interaction felt too direct, too personal for a first exchange, leaving her with a growing sense of discomfort. As he continued speaking, a quiet question formed in her mind, impossible to ignore. Why her? And what did he know that she didn't? He began as expected, with light conversation that matched the elegance of the evening, commenting on the event, the music, and how well she seemed to carry herself among such distinguished company. His voice was smooth, almost disarming, and for a brief moment she allowed herself to relax, responding politely, careful with every word. But the shift came quickly, so subtle at first that she almost missed it. His questions turned more personal, his gaze more focused, as he asked about her marriage in a tone that felt far too deliberate to be casual. "Are you happy?" he asked, the simplicity of the question carrying an unexpected weight. She hesitated, then smiled lightly, offering the kind of answer expected in such circles, something safe and unremarkable. Yet he didn't seem satisfied. There was a pause, a quiet stretch of silence where his eyes studied her, as if searching for something beneath her response. He spoke again, this time with a quieter intensity, mentioning how appearances could be deceiving, how truth often hid behind carefully constructed illusions. The words unsettled her, though she forced a soft laugh, unsure whether he was speaking philosophically or implying something more. His expression didn't change. If anything, it hardened slightly, and the air between them grew heavier. He continued, his tone sharpening just enough to make her pulse quicken, hinting at things left unsaid, at betrayals that people refused to see until it was too late. Her fingers tightened slightly at her side as unease spread through her. Something about the way he spoke felt intentional, almost targeted. The conversation no longer felt like polite exchange, but something else entirely, something darker, and she couldn't shake the growing feeling that whatever he was leading toward, she wasn't prepared to hear it. The shift came without warning, cutting through the tension like a blade. He looked at her steadily, his voice calm, almost detached, as he said, "Your husband is upstairs, but not alone." For a moment, everything around her seemed to fall silent. The music, the laughter, the soft clinking of glasses, all of it faded into nothing, as if the world itself had paused to let his words settle. She stared at him, unable to process what she had just heard, her mind rejecting it instantly. "That's not funny," she said, her voice tight, forcing a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "If this is some kind of joke—" "It isn't," he interrupted smoothly. There was no hesitation, no sign of doubt in his expression. He didn't look amused, nor apologetic. If anything, he seemed indifferent, as though he were stating a simple, undeniable fact. Her heart began to pound, a slow, heavy rhythm that echoed in her ears. "You're wrong," she insisted, though her voice wavered slightly now. "You don't know him." "I know enough," he replied quietly. Then, after a brief pause, he added, "If you need proof, you should go upstairs and see for yourself." The words lingered, heavy and impossible to ignore. Something inside her shifted, a fragile crack forming beneath the surface of everything she believed. Her thoughts spiraled, fragments of memories rising uninvited, late nights, unanswered calls, distant glances she had tried to overlook. No, she told herself, this couldn't be true. It didn't make sense. And yet, a cold unease spread through her chest, growing stronger with every passing second. She searched his face one last time, hoping to find some hint of deception, some sign that this was all a misunderstanding. But there was nothing, only quiet certainty. In that moment, her world began to fracture, the foundation of trust she had built trembling beneath her feet, as she realized that whatever waited upstairs might change everything forever. She stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his words pressing heavily against her chest as her mind struggled to catch up. Part of her wanted to dismiss everything immediately, to turn away and pretend she had never heard it. It would be easier that way, safer. But another part of her, quieter yet persistent, refused to let it go. What if he was telling the truth? Her thoughts began to unravel, pulling her backward into moments she had once ignored. Late nights, when her husband returned home distant and distracted. Phone calls he took in another room, his voice lowered just enough to keep her from hearing. The way his attention had slowly shifted, subtle at first, then undeniable. At the time, she had chosen trust over doubt. Now, those memories returned with a different meaning, sharper and harder to ignore. Her heart resisted, clinging to the man she believed she knew, to the love she thought they shared. But her mind pushed back, piecing together fragments she had once overlooked. The conflict between the two tightened inside her, making it hard to breathe. A wave of humiliation washed over her as a new thought surfaced. What if others already knew? What if she had been the only one blind to it, standing here among people who saw her as nothing more than a deceived wife? The idea stung deeply, igniting both anger and fear. She glanced toward the staircase, her pulse quickening. The thought of what she might find upstairs terrified her, yet the uncertainty felt worse. For a brief second, she considered leaving, escaping before the truth could fully form. But she couldn't. Not like this. Taking a slow breath, she steadied herself. Whatever waited upstairs, she needed to see it with her own eyes. She moved toward the staircase as if drawn by something beyond her control, each step slower than the last, her body heavy with hesitation. The lively sounds from the party behind her began to fade, dissolving into a distant hum that no longer felt real. It was as though she had stepped into another world entirely, one where time stretched and every movement carried weight. Her heels echoed softly against the polished floor, the sound sharper now in the growing silence. Each step upward felt deliberate, a quiet battle between fear and the need to know. She gripped the railing lightly, steadying herself as her thoughts threatened to overwhelm her. As she reached the upper level, the atmosphere shifted. The bright openness of the party below was replaced by dimmer lights and long, quiet corridors. Doors lined the hallway, all closed, each one holding its own unknown story. She found herself noticing small details she had overlooked before: the stillness in the air, the absence of voices, the way everything felt too calm. Her heartbeat grew louder, pounding against her chest as if trying to warn her to turn back. But she couldn't. Not anymore. The further she walked, the heavier the air seemed to become, pressing in around her, making it harder to breathe. And with every step, the truth felt closer, waiting just beyond the next door. She stopped in front of one door at the end of the corridor, her hand hovering just inches from the handle. Something about it felt certain, as if every step she had taken had led her exactly here. Her breath grew shallow, her chest rising and falling unevenly as doubt made one final attempt to pull her back. For a moment, she simply stood there, suspended between knowing and not knowing. Then, gathering what little strength she had left, she slowly pushed the door open. The scene inside struck her instantly, stealing the air from her lungs. Her husband stood too close to another woman, their posture unmistakably intimate, their expressions caught in a moment that should never have existed. It wasn't something that needed explanation, it was already clear. Time seemed to freeze, the world narrowing to that single image she couldn't escape. His head turned sharply at the sound, his face draining of color as shock replaced whatever ease he had felt moments before. This isn't," he started, his voice faltering as he stepped away too quickly, guilt written across every movement. She didn't move. She couldn't. Her eyes shifted briefly to the other woman, whose presence alone deepened the sting, turning the moment from painful to humiliating. "How long?" she asked, her voice quieter than she expected, yet steady in a way that surprised even her. "It's not what you think," he insisted, running a hand through his hair, desperation creeping into his tone. "I can explain." "Then explain," she cut in, her gaze unwavering now, though her heart felt like it was breaking with every second. But there was nothing he could say that would erase what she had already seen. The truth stood between them, undeniable and unchangeable. In that moment, everything she had believed and shattered completely, leaving behind only clarity, sharp and unforgiving, as she realized there was no turning back from this. She stepped out of the room slowly, her movements controlled, even though something inside her had broken apart completely. Her face remained composed, but her eyes carried the weight of what she had just witnessed, a silence deeper than any words could express. Behind her, she heard her husband calling out, his voice urgent, breaking, trying to explain himself as he followed her into the corridor. But she did not stop. She did not turn back. "Please listen to me," he pleaded, reaching out as if his words alone could undo what had already been seen. She lifted a hand slightly, not in anger, but in finality, refusing him entry into whatever part of her still remained untouched. That was no longer his place. As she descended the stairs, the atmosphere downstairs shifted subtly. Guests who had been laughing moments ago now watched her carefully, sensing something had changed without knowing what had happened. The music continued, but it felt distant, almost irrelevant. Across the room, the billionaire stood in quiet observation, his expression unreadable, neither satisfied nor regretful. He simply watched, as though confirming something only he understood. For a moment, she felt exposed under all those eyes, as if the entire world could see through her. But beneath that vulnerability, something else began to rise: steadiness, awareness, a quiet strength she hadn't known she possessed. The pain was still there, sharp and undeniable, but it no longer defined her entirely. As she reached the center of the room, her steps slowed, not from weakness, but from a dawning realization that she was no longer the same woman who had walked into this party. She found him standing slightly apart from the crowd, as if he had been waiting for her approach all along. Her steps slowed before she finally stopped in front of him, her expression controlled, but her eyes carrying the storm she refused to show. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The noise of the party felt distant again, as though the world had narrowed down to just the two of them. "Why?" she asked simply, her voice steady but layered with exhaustion. "Why don't we like that? Why me?" He regarded her calmly, as if he had expected the question from the very beginning. There was no immediate answer, only a brief silence that made the moment feel heavier. Then he spoke, his tone measured, neither defensive nor apologetic. "Because lies always collapse," he said quietly. "Some people choose to ignore them. Others deserve not to." She narrowed her eyes slightly, searching his face for something clearer, something honest. He continued, his gaze briefly flicking toward the staircase, as if recalling what had just unfolded upstairs. "Maybe I cannot tolerate dishonesty," he added. "Or maybe I've seen your husband before, and I know exactly what he is capable of." Her breath tightened, but he didn't stop there. "Or maybe," he said finally, "I simply believed you deserved the truth, even if it hurt." The ambiguity of his words lingered between them, unsettling and incomplete. He was neither a savior nor a villain. Something in between, shaped by motives she could not fully understand. As she looked at him, the earlier certainty she had about him began to blur, leaving behind more questions than answers, and a lingering doubt about whether his truth had been a gift or something far more complicated. She stood there for a long moment after leaving the billionaire behind, her thoughts no longer scattered but slowly aligning into something clearer, something sharper. Everything she had believed in, her marriage, her future, the life she had carefully adapted to, now felt different, as if seen through a truth she could never unsee. The love she had trusted no longer felt certain, and the identity she had built around it began to feel fragile, uncertain. But beneath the pain, something steadier began to rise. She realized she could no longer return to a life where she was expected to ignore what she knew, to smile through uncertainty, to live beside someone whose loyalty had already been broken. The idea of staying no longer felt like comfort. It felt like surrender. Her breathing steadied as clarity replaced confusion. She was not powerless, not anymore. Whatever happened next, it would be on her terms. Whether she chose to walk away completely or rebuild her life from the ruins of what she had lost, one thing was certain. She would no longer live in denial. For the first time that night, she lifted her chin with quiet resolve. The pain remained, but it no longer defined her. She understood now that her worth was not tied to wealth, status, or the man she had married. It belonged only to her, untouched and independent of betrayal. And with that realization, something inside her finally shifted, not breaking this time, but awakening. She took one final look back at the mansion, its lights glowing warmly against the night, hiding secrets behind beauty and silence. Everything that had once looked perfect now felt distant, almost unreal. The pain still lingered in her chest, but it no longer held her captive. Truth had arrived in the most painful way, yet it had given her something she had never truly possessed before: clarity. She understood now that appearances could be carefully built illusions, designed to hide fractures no one wanted to see. Love, trust, and loyalty were not always what they seemed. Sometimes they had to be broken before they could be understood. As she stepped away into the night, each step felt uncertain, but also freeing. She did not know exactly what waited ahead, but she was no longer afraid to find out. For the first time, she was not walking as someone's wife defined by betrayal, but as herself, wounded, awakened, and quietly strong. The future was unknown, but it belonged to her now, and that was enough.